Welcome to In the Zone with Chris Zander, where we talk lifestyle, entrepreneurship, self-care, and much more. So go grab a drink or a snack and come on back because it is now time to get in the zone. My guest today is a woman who carries a beautiful spirit, both internally and externally, and a woman who also wears many hats. She's an author, entrepreneur, and culinary artist, just to name a few. Here today to share wisdom to self-guidance from her book, NOURISH, A Guide to Coming Home to Yourself. Let's welcome Kirbee Miller. How are you doing, Kirbee?
Listen, it's a pleasure to be here, and I am doing well today.
Good.
You know, we get to hold the hard and the beautiful things at the same time, and I think many of us are in that season, but overall doing so well and so grateful to be here with you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. And I have to say this because we talked about this before we even started.
Yeah.
I have to give you your flowers before we even start.
Are we going to cry in the first 32
We might.
seconds?
'Cause I'm a crier.
Okay. Just wanted to know.
I just want to say, I really appreciate you. Over a year ago, you remember when we met?
I do.
Yeah. And I won't say the space is a
Close
sacred
to
space.
2 years ago. Yeah.
Almost 2 years ago.
Yeah.
I was like so down, you know, just getting out of college, trying to find my way, just going through things personally.
Yes.
And you and Lauren Mack
Yes.
were the people that held me accountable and told me that it's going to be okay, number one.
That's right.
And also told me that it's up to me
That's right.
what I want out of my life.
That's right.
And it all starts with me. So I have to give you the flowers today for
I received that.
So thank you for coming.
I received that. And thank you for, first of all, having the courage to be vulnerable. Because so many of us, myself included sometimes, suffer in silence. And you having the courage to say, hey, I'm coming up on this threshold of my life. I'm graduating college. I have these dreams. I have all of these other things that may seem like they're in competition with one another. And it's taking a lot of mental and heart space. And I know what my long-term goal is, but I'm not real sure what to do next, you know? So to be vulnerable, to allow safe people in, emphasis on safe, to allow safe people in, kudos to you, because here we are almost 2 years later, sitting inside of one of those visions where you're using your lived experience and your ability to connect with people to serve and to uplift and to equip. And I promise you have no idea where it's going to take you. So I appreciate you sharing with me those beautiful flowers. I am a firm believer that tell the people that have made an impact on your life, tell them that while you have the chance. So I received that. And thank you.
Absolutely.
And I'm so proud of you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So I have to ask you this. First, I want to talk about your entrepreneurial journey as the owner of KiNiMi Kitchen and founder of Kirbee and Co. What inspired you to embrace this new path here in Nashville?
Yes. Oh, my goodness. When people talk about the entrepreneurial journey, I kind of laugh a little bit because I have always had this enterprising spirit. I sometimes talk about I was probably the only third grader that people at church were buying their holiday desserts from. Wow. You know, I started entrepreneurship back in like when I could make 7-Up pound cakes and just, and it wasn't always just about selling them. It was the joy of just creating. But then there was kind of a marketplace, a demand for those kind of things. So I kind of laugh about that because it's hard to have a distinct beginning to the entrepreneurial journey. Yeah. But my path here in Nashville and really establishing that has been a lengthy one. But it's been one of
I love that.
It's lengthy.
I'm sorry.
Yes. You know, some people are like, you know, I got the spark last week. I'm like, it's been weeks, it's been months, it's been years. It's been a long time in the making because one of my gifts that I now can appreciate is the ability to connect dots across industries and to connect people across spaces. And I love to do that with ease. That's one of the things that I most appreciate about myself. And while we need to learn how to receive flowers, we need to learn how to give flowers to ourselves. So sometimes, come on. We may spend a little bit of time there.
God. Okay.
We may spend some time there because we are groomed to pour into other people, but don't you dare think something good about yourself. But you're like, wait, but there's all this self-love and all these things. But then if you, for a second, show that you have some confidence or that you appreciate something about yourself, it can take the scab off of insecurity in others.
Oh, you are not lying, right?
And then you shrink because you can pick up on that energy. But one thing I know for sure, we are living on a floating rock with made-up rules. So we might as well make up some rules that we like. And one of those would just be holding yourself to a standard of caring for yourself, loving yourself, protecting yourself just as much as you would your best friend, because really you are your own best friend. So all of that being said, I learned to kind of pay attention to my intuition and my nods, and that's what took me on that entrepreneurial journey initially. So I have a background in science and healthcare and was in the corporate world in that space, but also had this tug to continue to connect people meaningfully, to create spaces for people to gather, to create culinary experiences that interrupt time, that you can't eat food and multitask. You have to like take a bite and say, what just happened to me? And then that opened up conversation. So that's what was really the genesis of KiNiMi Kitchen years ago now. And that was really just my answer to a soul's call to say, this is a gift that you've had for a long time. I started cooking when I was 5.
Wow, yeah.
And I never left it. You know, even in my college dorm room, I had all types of, illegal appliances from the George Foreman to fajita makers and, the extra large refrigerator with the freezer. And I would gather people then. And that continued and continued in the conversations that I was able to guide. And so KiNiMi Kitchen was really my answer to that call. Right alongside my corporate career, I just started creating spaces where people could have meaningful conversation over food, because food made with love really helps reduce the barrier.
Yeah.
It gently invites you to put your titles down. Because here's one thing.
Absolutely.
When you're around good food, you're not like, how much money do you have in your bank account?
Absolutely.
What's your title again? Is that a senior?
How long have you been doing this?
Yeah, exactly. So what brought you? It's just like, oh my gosh, did you taste that? Or this takes me back to a time when I was 8 years old. And, so I really loved the sacred space that happened over food with intention. So that was the genesis of KiNiMi Kitchen. And then the journey to Kirbee and Co was really this inclusion of these other things that I really love. So really taking that scope beyond just food and conversation to this overarching scope of nourishment, nourishing yourself, mind, body, spirit. So that's taken me on a beautiful journey into speaking and putting my book project into the world and hosting retreats and a lot of other really cool things that I love.
Yeah, I love that. And I have to say this as well. You are one of the busiest women here in Nashville.
There's a lot
I
going
love
on.
to see it.
Thank you.
Number one, you don't see a lot of women of color doing what you're doing.
I appreciate that. I receive that.
And being successful.
I appreciate that.
It's not because people don't have what it takes, but it's because you've crafted that path for yourself.
Yeah. And that's a craft that's, some blood, sweat, and tears into that. Yeah.
So
thank you for that.
I'm happy and proud of you for that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And I would hope that anyone who is watching the journey, because I try to be very transparent about the ups, the downs, the in-betweens, that someone removes the distance between what they think my journey is and what theirs could be. Because oftentimes you look at people and you're like, oh, they must have had a rich uncle or they must have this or must have that. It's like, no, it's just a person who had a dream and a spark and who's willing to be a novice and willing to try and willing to own their excellence too at the same time.
Yeah.
And so I'm simply that person each day waking up to put a little bit more toward the dream and the direction that I've been given. There's an invitation in my book that really gets us to think about our gifts and our talents. And instead of something to hide or shrink or make digestible, what if we consider that those have been given to us and they're on loan to us?
Please talk about that. Given to us,
yes,
and it's loaned to us.
They're on loan to us. No matter how long your journey is here on this floating rock, what if you considered your gifts as something precious, something unique, something of innate value, even if it doesn't earn you a dime? What if you thought about that? Because when you love someone well and you are excited about giving them something and you say, hey, you can borrow this, right? You've probably done that for a friend or a family member. And you're excited about what they're going to do with it. You're excited about, what they can create with it. Now, what if you did that and you saw them in 6 months and you said, how's it going? How have you been enjoying it? And what if they said, it was really nice when you gave that to me. I really thought of so many things that I would do with it. But you know what I did? I put it in the back of my closet because I wanted it to be safe. I put it in the back of my closet because, when I took it out the first time, it made other people feel bad because they didn't have it. So thank you for giving that to me, but it's kind of been hidden and it's safe. How would you feel about that?
I would be so, number one, outdone because how dare you?
Come on. Come on. And you want that person to have their individual experience with it because you had an intention of giving it. So that's what I really, that recalibrates me sometimes because as you have mentioned, I am a multi-hyphenate person.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
So having a career in healthcare and sciences and cooking and speaking and real estate and global travel.
Author,
all the things, right?
What else?
And then people, if they hear 3 of those, their eyes can glass over, they can get overwhelmed or they can feel like, oh no, but I'm not doing enough. That's never the intention. It's what is possible with the ingredients you've been given.
Yeah.
So with that idea of our gifts being on loan to us and that example of how you would feel, you'd be like, how dare you? How dare you? If there's something in your soul that's been stirring, if there's something that sparks you or gives you light when you think about it and it scares you a little bit, how dare you bury it?
Yeah.
And just give yourself permission because one thing that keeps me accountable as well, because there are days that I need to pep talk myself.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
One thing that keeps me accountable is this is not dress rehearsal. We don't get to come to this life and play small, kind of visit our dreams and goals, then regret that and then come back and do it again. At least not in this form.
And why do you say that? Because I feel like a lot of people do not understand that.
They don't.
They think, it is kind of like dress rehearsal. And if I don't want to do it anymore, that's it. I'll just step back and it's like, no, that's not how life is.
It's not how it is.
You move with intentionality.
Every day.
Yes. Why should people be aware of that?
Because the days are an even greater currency than money. Because we can get more money, you can lose money, you can get it back. But a hard truth, but a sobering truth, is that time is a non-renewable currency. And so that concept of dress rehearsal being like, even if you get up and you dress the part, but you're just kind of rehearsing, you're not really putting your heart and soul into it. If you're not willing to risk looking like a fool or looking like a novice, if you're not willing to risk looking like an expert.
Yeah.
Because of what that brings or who you may lose. You're kind of going through life in this kind of safe mode. You're dressing and you're kind of pretending to be the part, but you're not actually owning the part. And how sad. Because the days are not coming back. And there are people tied to your gift.
I want to ask you this because we live in an era where it's harder for people to really extend their heart and show their heart.
Yeah.
It's like people want to show a, reformed version of themselves.
Yes.
Why is it harder for people to just step out of that and just be authentic? And I know it's easier said than done. And also it may seem like the world wants you to be more fake than authentic. But why is it more important to be authentic opposed to vice versa?
Yes. So authenticity is really an essential element and ingredient to a well-lived life. And you deserve to have a well-lived life. You deserve to be in a life that fits, that's honest. And it's only there that you will find what life has for you. It's only there that you'll interact with people and opportunities that have your name on it. When you're pretending to be something or someone else, you're going to keep bumping up against situations and people that you're like, this doesn't feel right. Yeah, because it doesn't have your name on it. It's whatever role that you're playing. And so in order to come into alignment for what this life has for you, that's why it's important to be authentic. That's why it's important to be the best version of you, the messy, the ugly, the hard, the beautiful, everything in between. That's why it's important because you don't want to move through life in such a way that on the outside, it's defendable, it's dependable, it's something that people can say, oh, this looks really good. But when it's quiet, there's nothing familiar about it to you. I talk to people and to myself a lot about how you can make all the right decisions into a life that feels anything but right.
Oh, please expound on that.
Because the right decisions are oftentimes what other people are telling you to do or that you think you kind of work it out on a little piece of paper. If this, then that. All the while your soul is saying, I don't want to. But you're like, no, but if this, then that result. And so you do the right thing. Because if you come up against opposition or someone questions you, you can say, well, here's the plan that I followed. Here's why this was the right thing. But I had someone tell me on a trip in Italy last year, because I go every fall to teach, and one of the retreat participants said something that rocked my world. We were talking about a scenario where you stay in something because you're loyal, or you stay in something because you want to have integrity. Yeah. And that's important. But she said something that rocked my soul that dovetails into what you're asking about authenticity. She said, if at any point you had to go against your soul in a decision, if there were things that came up that let you say, you know what, this isn't right, or maybe you should ask more questions, or maybe it's time to step away. If you ever left your soul's knowing in order to meet a certain goal, you can't call that integrity. Call it something else. Because if you leave yourself, you are no longer in integrity. Rocked my whole world. And so I say that to say, because when we talk about the right decision, sometimes we're like, well, I do this because I'm loyal or I want to be in integrity. But have you really checked in with where you are and where your heart is and where your soul is begging you to be? If no, you have a version of something. You have something right by a certain standard. But if you check in with yourself and you look around in your life and you've made all these right decisions, but nothing feels right, that's an opportunity to go a little bit deeper.
The thing is about being self-assured and looking deep within. It can be very intimidating for those who do not, right? Why do you think it's so intimidating, and how do you deal with people who tend to be a little bit more intimidated by just your presence and being able to just be real and raw and have a sense of self? You get what I'm saying? Because one thing that I realized having that same energy, right, is that people oftentimes do not like it. And it's a force for them, and they don't know what to do with it. So how do you deal with it?
Yeah. That is something that I've managed my whole life. Because I've always had a very strong sense of self. That doesn't mean I haven't left myself. I've always had a strong sense of self, but I've also been very intuitive. And so I could pick up on energy shifts. So subconsciously, you notice when a person notices your energy and then they change. So then you start to dilute it a little bit because as humans, we want to stay in relationship. We want to stay in proximity, right? And the evolution, the growth it's my job to protect what I came here to do, and to do that at its highest. And what someone says or thinks about you has very little to do with you. Imagine that. And so that was a mindset shift, because it kind of hits you when you're like, wait, my intention is pure. I am simply being myself. So while you may be intimidated, or you may feel, and intimidated is one way someone could feel, or they can feel less than, or they can feel a separation. That is really an invitation to either ask more questions or to say, hey, I need to protect myself and my energy a little bit more. That is not an invitation to leave yourself. So there's a song that I love that's called All Vibes. Because you know how sometimes people say, good vibes only. I used to have a little necklace that said that. But this song really invited me into this idea, and it says, I'm an alchemist. I can use whatever you throw me. I can take all vibes, not just good vibes only. What they say about you says more about God than it says about you. Because when you are being your full self and you're walking in your divinity, if that angers someone, or if that makes them feel a certain way, what they say about you says more about God than it says about you. That says more about your nature. So being able to have that buffer in between has helped me, because there are some people that I've intersected with that I've kind of had that feeling. And because I've grown, I've been able to stay in it a little bit longer and ask them more questions and invite them into, okay, well, let's go on a little bit of a journey. Let's redirect some of that intensity. And let's talk about what is aching for you. Because when people treat you...
I know you're being serious, but I'm thinking about it in a petty way. It's like, what's aching? Like,
yeah, I like that. You know?
You know what I mean?
We can be a little petty sometimes. But yes, it's... but I like it though. Use it how you need it. But it is that sense that sometimes people have a deep wound that you just trigger and you had nothing to do with it. And I know I love quotes. My book is full of them. And there's one that says, heal so you don't bleed on those who didn't cut you. And sometimes we're going to interface with unhealed people. And so that ache, that wounding is going to spill out on you and it has nothing to do with you. So the way that I've been able to handle that is to depersonalize that a bit because I have taken the time to know myself, my dark and my light, and I will protect her. So if I'm in a space and I know that I'm being authentic, I know that I'm being my true self, and it results in something like that, I don't have to own that. I don't have to carry that with me. And I free that person to their own experience. So that's something that's really, really been a part of growth, because there was a period of my life where it would cause me just to kind of go back into my own little private world and not shine and not be out there. Yeah, exactly.
Just really alter your light.
Mm-hmm. But what a disservice.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I want to talk about your book, obviously, Nourish, A Guide to Coming Home to Yourself.
Yeah.
I want to first talk about the crisis that you endured that allowed you the space to really dig in and start journaling and just put the book out there. Can you talk about the crisis that you endured with your parents?
Sure. Happy to share. Because one intention that I set over my life is that I don't want my pain to return to me void. And I think we've all been through those painful moments where you're like, why me? How did this happen, right? And it's a depth of pain. And so for me, I had to make this agreement that I didn't want that to return to me void. So about 5.5 years ago, I got a phone call that would change everything, that my parents were in a terrible car accident here in Nashville. And that one phone call set off a cascade of events that still are impacting me to this day, sitting in this chair. So both of my parents were critically injured, and my mom subsequently sustained a TBI, or traumatic brain injury, and is now paralyzed. And so we went through a hard season with both of them being in the hospital, trachs, feeding tubes, having to make decisions. And it was like one of the most surreal moments of my life. So as I mentioned before, I have a background in healthcare. And so I worked at the medical center where my parents were patients. And that, thankfully, I was able to make a phone call to help get them diverted there. But what an odd space to be in. And I want to go on this road just a little bit because I had learned to compartmentalize. And I was so thankful that I was in the space where I knew the right people to call and to get the help that we needed. But when it was quiet, and I'm just sitting there, my mom in a coma, and then walking to the next room where my stepdad, they're asking me questions about what his final wishes would be. Then sleeping in those rooms night after night, and then waking up, taking a shower in the tiniest showers in America, in hospital rooms. Yeah. And then walking across campus to hold my meetings and be in those spaces. Ooh. And then stopping by my car on the way back to the hospital across campus to fall apart. To fall apart. And then put my makeup back on. And that continued for months. Because I thought, okay, this is how we compartmentalize this. And sometimes we need to be strong, right? But it was during that time that I returned to one of my first loves, and that's writing. Yeah. Because writing, if you give yourself the space, can be one of the most hyper-personal experiences. And for me, and maybe some of you can relate, when you're going through a deep tragedy, it can be challenging to find adequate language and adequate safe spaces. And what I was finding is that when people heard a sliver of the story, they would get overwhelmed. And then I'm comforting them. Or people, they just don't know what to say. They don't know what to do. And that would make me feel less held. It would make me feel more lonely, less resourced. And that's not to say if you're going through a hard time not to reach out to your people, but I'm just sharing my experience. And so I felt as though, and I've said this before, I felt as though I was suffocating in plain sight. in geographical close proximity to people who knew me, respected me, loved me. And I was wondering, like, how can you see I'm not doing well?
So how did those people treat you, or how did they even offer a hand? You know what I'm saying? During that time?
And I want to be fair, because people use the tools that they have. And sometimes we have to just understand people's capacity. Mm-hmm. But then you also have to honor the capacity that you need.
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
And sometimes those are not compatible.
And, you know, sometimes we will say, we'll go without sometimes and say, well, I know they don't have the capacity and I know they don't know what I need. So let me just bend a little bit. Let me just shift and
That's
pivot.
right. That's right. And then let me pretend like I don't have those needs, you know?
Yeah.
And that's not true, because they just go down there and they fester, and it becomes a really hard thing to unpack later. But you're right. We're groomed to kind of have less needs, be more convenient, more digestible. And so that's really what I was going through at that time. People did offer things, and I believe they did that out of honesty and out of what they had. And also, sometimes we don't know how to receive, and sometimes we don't have adequate language. And so I will say that's a give and take on both sides. But it was through that journey where I felt like I don't know how to express. I don't know how to allow people to show up. I don't even know if people have the capacity to show up, because in that role, it's like you're decision making, you're working, you're doing all these things, and people are just like, you're so strong. I couldn't do what you're doing. And I'm like, well, me either. You know, a few months before this, I wouldn't know that I had the capacity to do this. But it was through writing and allowing myself to say everything on a page. Not the digestible soundbite before you overwhelm someone. Not the, hey, are you hungry? You know, where I could really unpack those raw, hard feelings, those things that kind of felt like they were coming from a soul level. It was writing that helped me to do that. And I got a ping during that time that perhaps if I needed this, other people needed this, because this concept of nourishment is mind, body, spirit. And for me, as I've said before, healthcare, food, speaking, connecting people, there were all of these essential ingredients that were at play, and they kind of coalesced into this project, Nourish. Because for me during that time, and still today, I didn't need someone to say, hey, Kirbee, in 6 months, you'll feel better. If you have $20,000 to invest in this program, you'll feel better. I needed something that was within reach to my very tired, dehydrated hand. I needed something that I could feel, something that was real, something that was reliable. And so for me, that was journaling. All you need is a pen and some paper.
Oh, yeah.
That was really simple, beautiful recipes.
And yourself.
Yes, and yourself.
Authentic self.
Your authentic self. Because that avatar self, she goes out the door in the middle of a tragedy. And I mentioned to you before we were on mic a quote that I loved before, but now is imprinted in my soul. And it says, adversity will introduce a man or a woman to themselves. Because when you're in adversity, the room clears. It doesn't matter what's in your bank account. It doesn't matter your title. It doesn't matter the places you've traveled. Those things can help. But when you're sitting with you and you better not be sitting with a stranger. And so that's why the subtitle of the book is A Guide to Coming Home to Yourself. Because many of us have placed home in other things.
Yeah.
And that's human. But home within self, so that no matter where you find yourself, whether that's in tragedy or if that's in absolute bliss, because that can trigger people too. Wherever you find yourself, you need to be at home with yourself and know yourself. And the last thing I'll say about this is it's also more, how do I want to say this? It's healthier when you're in relationship with other people if you are at home within yourself. And here's what I mean by that. Sometimes we can have these large voids that we have no idea how to fill, but we want partners, friends, family members to fill. You are with you 24 hours a day. So if you have no clue, it's a little unfair to expect that someone else would know how to fill it. And what bad news, because we always want somebody to come along and save us. And for me, that was a pivotal moment when I realized no one is coming to save me. No one. They can come along and be allies. But there was so much relief when I remembered that I have everything within me and within my reach to heal And so that's what set forth that cascaded journey of writing and then externalizing the project to the world so that people can have a resource that's their own. I tell people I designed every page with intention, the cover with intention.
Yes.
It's got a soft feel, but it's a hard cover because I want it to have the components of a best friend that you may not have. I want it to be soft enough that you find safety there. But I want you to feel that hard cover to say, oof, this has capacity for these big things. This has capacity for answers that I'm not even sure I'm ready to see. But that's the road to self-development and healing, is asking the hard questions and then sticking around for the answers.
Yes. Not running. Because sometimes we'll ask the hard question. And then it's like, oh, I don't really want to know the answer.
Oh, no, because the feelings start to come up.
Yeah.
And then you're like, oh, I'm out. You know, I ask the question and I tell people I'm a recovering feelings fugitive. Like if it felt too good or too proud, I'd run. If it felt too sad, I would go do something productive. So I am a runner. I would run away from feelings. But what I learned when I
have to ask you this because some people, like, I would even say that I'm like that at times. The older I get and the more mature I get, I find that I'm not running from my feelings as much. So I'm curious to know, like, how can you help people and what words of wisdom can you give to people who tend to run? Because it's one of those things, if you continue to run and you know it's there, you're going to be running for 10 years and you're just 10 years older. Going through 10 years, more stuff. And you never dealt with the root of it.
That's right. And then you're going to get to a point where you twist the door on a knob and you go through it and you're like, oh, you'll be right back at square one. You think you ran, but you're right at the beginning. And I had to realize that as well. That's a tough lesson. So that look on your face is how it feels. And so first of all, if there's someone listening or watching who's like, oof, I run too, the first thing I'd ask, if shame came up, that you would exchange it for curiosity and grace. Because I have found, for most people, myself included, there was a time in our lives where running literally saved us. And so I want you to have grace and compassion for that part of you that knew to run. And then I want us to go a little deeper and ask ourselves, you know, would I like to try something different? Is it safe to slow down? And if yes, then you can start the journey. Because we bypass this part that there are things that happen to us in life sometimes that we didn't deserve.
Oh, yeah.
That shouldn't have happened, that someone should have stepped in and filled the gap, but they didn't. And so sometimes running physically and or emotionally saved us. So for fellow feelings fugitives, thank yourself for getting out of danger. But then invite yourself into this concept that you've evolved into an adult that has your own back.
Yeah.
And that the things that happen to you won't happen to you the same way again.
And
because you've got you.
Can I just be honest?
Yes.
Because, you know, I've told you about my situation and being molested as a kid from age 4 to 9. And during that time, throughout so many years, I didn't start talking about it until I was about 23 years old.
So all those years. That repression. That running.
And then now, when I look back, right? And another thing, too, from running. Now, when I'm able to talk about it now, I look back and I realize I'm so grateful to be in the space I'm in now. Because the thing is about being my own best friend and holding it firm for myself, it's knowing that now people knew about it. And did nothing about it in my family. There was a letter written from me and one of my cousins.
So what do you do with that when it's like those who are supposed to protect me turned a blind eye?
But you know,
lack of courage.
But you know, I take it now and I say, I'm thankful that I'm strong enough to know that now.
That's right.
Because if I had talked about it then earlier, in my weak spot and when I'm running, that would have crushed me. I would have ran even further. So I'm glad that I know that now. That
so
I'm on
you
the
can
other
trust
side
your
of it.
journey, trust your timing. And that's powerful. And first of all, thank you for sharing that
Absolutely.
again and being open. Because when we realize the people that navigate among us that we are like, oh, they look so happy or they're doing cool things, when you realize that they too are keepers of dark things, it hopefully can offer some encouragement. And something that you mentioned about the feelings and being able to feel them now, one thing that I learned, and I'm continuing to learn, I always like to say I put an emphasis on the ing, learn ing.
Yes.
Still in the season, that the feelings have knowledge, they have wisdom. And so when I slowed down during that period of my life and I was cracked wide open, it's like all the feelings that have been running to chase me over years are like, and it's like they hand me this note and they're like, we've been trying to tell you something. And that's really changed my relationship with feelings. So when you talked about what wisdom I would give other people is tools, have compassion for yourself. So in the book, I have this wheel. I did not produce this. This is something that's used in a variety of different modalities, but it's called a feelings wheel. And what interesting news for us feelings fugitives, that there's more than just happy, sad, afraid, right?
Yeah.
But this is a tool that helps me have more specific language for my experience to honor that. Because if I were to come in here and we have this great experience together, and on the way out, go with me on this thought, on the way out, if I was like, Curtis, thank you for the great time. Curtis, thanks for having me on your show. Curtis, my soul was really open the whole time. What are you thinking?
Curtis, who is
Curtis?
Like, who is that?
Exactly. So that natural feeling that came, we like, it's Curtis. Okay. But I'm saying all these nice things to you, like da-da-da-da-da. So that same innate feeling that you had, imagine how our feelings when we were hurt, when we were abandoned, when we were betrayed, when someone asks us how we're doing, and even when we ask ourselves how we're doing, we're like, I'm fine. They're like, what? Who the is fine?
Right, because it's not
fine.
It's not fine.
Or I'm just a little sad, but what if you're feeling guilty or despair or powerless or vulnerable or abandoned? And that's what the wheel helps you to get more specific language. Because when I call you by name, when I call you Chris, we're here.
Yeah.
And we can call in resources that are specific for that name. You don't want Curtis's resources. You want Curtis, okay? And so you don't want just Sad's resources. You may need the resource of what comes in when I know that I've been betrayed. What comes in when I'm feeling powerless? I want that resource. I don't want the resource just for a little sad. And then to counterbalance this thing, because this whole journey is about holding the dark and the light, instead of just repressing, I just want to be happy. I just want to be a happy person. What if we use the wheel and we go out and we say, well, what makes me feel proud? When do I feel most optimistic? Who helps me feel most optimistic? When do I feel confident? Oof, when is the last time I felt liberated?
Yeah.
What could help me feel liberated? When we go out and we use more specific language on both sides, then you get to come into relationship with yourself, the parts of yourself that have been begging you to notice. And sometimes that comes out in the lack of sleep, lack of motivation, lack of depth in relationships. All of those things, our feelings are trying to get our attention. Pay attention to me, pay attention to me, pay attention to me, call me by name. And so that's why this is a really important part of the book, because as you navigate, and I have created these prompts, all of which I needed, I want you to stay in contact with those feelings. Even if you want to run, that's why I put the wheel in the book. I tell people, like, dog-ear that page, go back to it as often as possible, because after each prompt and quote, before you hop into responding, there's a spot that says what feelings came up when you read the prompt or the quote. Because we need a parking lot for those things. We need a place for them to feel at home, because again, as we talked about earlier, when you feel big feelings, you can get triggered and you can just be like, oh, well, that's enough of that for today. And you won't go on the journey. And there's so much wisdom in your body, in your mind, that is just waiting for you to notice, but you can't get there unless you stay in it. And so these are just some tools that have helped me to stay in it, to have self-discovery, to have honesty, to have relationship with self, to have forgiveness of self.
Yeah.
There's a whole section that I have in here around forgiveness of self, forgiveness of others, and that's something I'm still forgiving. I'm still in that. So that's a little bit about feelings and my process with them, my journey with them, and how I invite other people through the book to navigate these, because this impacts every part of your life. And so I tell people with this scope of work, with it being Nourish, a guide to coming home to yourself. In my work now, I invite people to come home spiritually to themselves, emotionally to themselves, and then also feel physically in my work in real estate as a realtor.
Yeah.
And the reason why that whole ecosystem goes together is because where you lay your head at night, where you gather friends, where you dream, where you fall apart is so important. And oftentimes we don't have home or safety even in the decision. Oftentimes in that realm, you're treated like a transaction. What's your credit score? What's this? What's that?
Yeah.
And for me, the reason why I added that license to my ecosystem is because I know how important home is. Physically, emotionally, spiritually. And I feel like it's a call to be a safe person, whether it's me on a stage in front of 500 people speaking or in an intimate one-on-one, or someone who says, hey, I find safety in this and I want you to be my guide as I'm finding my home, as I'm building my financial legacy, but also as I'm building this place for me to come back to myself.
Yeah.
And so for me, that's how that all hangs together. And your feelings about yourself and your trajectory and what's happened to you and your future impact every area. And I've seen that across the board.
And I love how you have a conglomerate of everything that works. Literally, you're centered. And everything that's around you is moving around you because you're centered. Does that make sense?
It does make sense.
Have you ever saw yourself that way? Because I see it. Does that make sense?
It
I
does.
see you and I see all of the titles and all of the different things that you're doing. I just see it moving around you. It's like the currency of money. You know, they talk about the currency of money, right?
Yes.
It flows.
It flows, yes.
And that's what I see.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you for that, sharing your experience of me, because there's something that a good friend of mine, we co-facilitate retreats together, and she has a soundbite that says, sometimes you have to trust the person that's in front of you. Meaning, allow someone who knows you and cares about you to be a reflection of you so that you can internalize that. And there's also a quote that says, sometimes you have to borrow somebody's love for you to ignite the love within yourself. Yeah. So I receive that, is really the road that I'm going on with that. And I do see myself as grounded now. I know myself in this season. And not just like, I know myself.
Yeah.
I know my dark and my light. I know there is still space between knowledge and applied knowledge.
Yeah.
But I do know myself and I trust myself. I respect myself. And I resource myself.
Yeah.
And so that can come through in being centered, because one thing that I've come into agreement, I'll never leave myself again. Because she's got work to do and she's got joy to be had. And so if I leave her, that kind of presses pause on that part of the story. It
does. Yeah.
And I deserve to live a full story. And when you know yourself and you are invested in nourishing yourself, that's where that centering comes in. And that's independent of any of those titles. And that's independent of anything that I could lose. That's independent of anything that I could gain. Because I've been through it. I've been through many different cycles. I'm in a really interesting season as it is right now. But when it's quiet, and that's our litmus test, folks. When it's quiet, I have so much gratitude.
Yeah.
For all of it.
Yeah.
I have so much gratitude. And it's the gratitude that I see in other people, that initial spark. And it's that gratitude that cost you something. You didn't just get it because it's like, I just want to have a gratitude journal. No, it's that gratitude when you're not sure that those dark nights will ever result in a sunrise.
Yeah.
It's that gratitude that's born in that season that I have. And so that's what can come through in the groundedness, because I might add another few titles in the next few years.
Oh, yeah.
I may lose a few titles, but all along the journey, I know who Kirbee is, and I will protect her and I will resource her. So that can come across in that grounded state. So I appreciate you sharing that reflection with me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, so now I want to ask you about this. You have a quote,
yes,
right, that sticks very close to your heart.
Yes.
And that you live by.
Yes.
Can you please share what the quote is to our listeners and our watchers?
Yes, absolutely. I'd be glad to. This quote is by a good friend and mentor named Donald Miller. And the quote goes, "Don't think you have to transform before you live a great story. Live a great story, and the story itself will transform you. So you see how you felt with that? It's been permission giving. It's been a little bit convicting because the prompt that I wrote following that I had to ask myself and then I ask others through the book is, where in your life have you been putting something on hold? Waiting for a better version of you, waiting for a transformation, waiting for the partner, the degree, the weight loss. Where have you been putting yourself on hold and not allowing yourself to live a great story because you think you need to be something or someone else? And I had to ask myself that. That's why you see me move through the world in such a multi-hyphenate, multi-passionate way, because that's my true nature. That's my great story. And I can attest to the fact that that great story has transformed me. And so when we think about, this is not dress rehearsal, when we think about knowing ourselves, when we think about all of these things that we've talked about, this quote really helps to invite us into a beautiful conclusion of that. What's your great story? And only you know that. Only you have to be the author of that. Only you have to sign off on that. What is your great story? Yeah. And how are you going to go about living that? Because you don't have to be anyone else. You don't have to be any more successful. You don't have to be any less heartbroken. You don't have to be any richer before you start living your great story. And it's through that, it's kind of paradoxical. It's through that courage to step out and live that great story that it will transform you.
Okay. That was deep. I have to ask this in closing.
Mm-hmm.
Where can people purchase Nourish, a guide to coming home to yourself?
Yes. So it's an absolute honor every time I see a tag of the book. It's at this point made its way around the world. So there are a few different ways. You can purchase on Amazon. And I ask that when you get it, take a picture, tag me on the socials, because it's been really cool to see where it shows up. And then also there are often times where you can purchase it in person, because I host Nourish events all through Nashville and around the world at this point. But I have a series that's kicking off in July.
Yeah.
At Soho House, Nashville. That will be a monthly series. And so people will be able to purchase the book there as well. But if you're like, hey, I listened to this episode and maybe I could utilize some time to do some meditative journaling, even though I have never thought about it before, but I kind of like what you're saying. You can get it on Amazon, because there's a whole component at the front of the book that before we even hop in, I ask you to come into some agreements with yourself. And so if you're listening to this, I think that's powerful. And then there's a whole section about how do you make space to come home to yourself? Because sometimes we hear these great notions of, a guide to coming home to yourself. Well, how do you even do that? So there's a whole section before you hop in that helps guide you on small habits and rituals to build trust with yourself again. Because really a lot of this comes down to trust. We've not held our word to ourselves, or other people have made us not feel trustworthy. So how do I want to come home to someone that I don't trust? So there are certain recommendations for you to come alongside and show up for yourself and come into better relationship with yourself and then go on the journey. So if that's something that sounds like it's of interest, you can purchase Nourish, a guide to coming home to yourself on Amazon. And like any good entrepreneur, there's links in my bio.
I was going to ask you, where can people follow you on Instagram and social media as well?
Yes, so good. So I'm most active on Instagram, and you can follow along with the journey at Kirbee and Co. And Kirbee is Kirbee and Co. And you spell the word and out, C-O. And I emphasize that because the number of people who spell Kirbee with a Y is astonishing. But it's Kirbee with 2 E's and Co. on Instagram. And that's where you really get an invitation into my ecosystem. I do behind the scenes of what's happening in my world of speaking and real estate and even caregiving for my mom, because out of that car accident and her paralysis, I became the primary caregiver to move and take care of her. So I share the behind the scenes of that. So if you want to go on an authentic journey of encouragement, and we have some laughs and some late night lives. I love to do lives in my bathrobe, so I invite you to grab your bathrobe and get on there and talk with me. So I would love it if people follow the journey on Instagram.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Kirbee, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. And more than anything, I appreciate your realness, your rawness, and your transparency. So for those of you watching today and tuning in, thank you for tuning in. Make sure you go purchase a copy of the book and follow Kirbee on Instagram. And I will see you next time. Until next time.